It was the sound of his voice that stopped me cold. I had just closed the iron gate behind me, arms full of groceries. My boots crunching against the gravel path that led from the estate to the woods. The late afternoon sun was warm, but the air still carried that early spring bite. And then I heard it, a soft, raspy whisper from beyond the pines. "Alina." My heart jumped so violently it felt like it bruised my ribs. I froze, nearly dropping the bag of apples in my arms. I hadn't heard that voice in 5 years. Not once, not in dreams, not in voicemail archives, not even in my worst moments of longing or despair. Caleb was gone, dead presumed, and yet I turned toward the sound like a woman possessed. But that moment, me standing there, stunned in the orange light, wondering if my mind had finally broken. That wasn't the beginning. Not really. The beginning was quieter, slower. The kind of beginning that creeps up on you while you're busy pretending you're fine. My name is Alina Moore. I was 31 when that moment happened. When my dead husband returned from nowhere and tore open wounds I'd spent years stitching shut. After Caleb vanished, I stayed in the small farmhouse outside Willamette Valley that he'd inherited from his grandfather. I kept the garden alive. I paid the bills. I cared for his mother, Ilalana, who had a mild stroke the year after he disappeared. She and we clung to each other like two women on a raft, refusing to drown in a sea of unanswered questions. The town whispered, "Of course, they always do. Maybe he ran away. Maybe he cheated and left. Maybe she knows more than she says." But Eleanor never once blamed me. She'd cut my face in her thin hands and say, "He's still out there, baby. I feel it in my bones." So I worked, I cooked, I cared, and I waited. Not actively, not in a naive, hopeless sort of way, but in the way a soldier waits for peace. Quietly. 2 years ago, I took a job as a housekeeper at a private estate owned by Ms. Rebecca Linwood, a wealthy, discreet woman who didn't care about my past as long as I was efficient, invisible, and could sew like magic. I wore 3 hats there: housemaid, seamstress, and occasional personal assistant. The pay was under the table, but generous. No benefits, no security, just cash, trust, and silence. Every morning I'd leave the house by 7, walk 15 minutes to the bus stop, then ride into the hills to where the Linwood property sat, nestled between vineyards and evergreens. After my shift, I'd return home, cook dinner, prep Eleanor's meds, and maybe if I wasn't too exhausted, read a few pages of whatever romance novel she had lying around. I didn't have a life. Not really, but I had routine. And sometimes routine is enough to keep you from collapsing. That afternoon had been like any other. I'd finished early, picked up groceries from the local copay, and decided to walk the scenic route home through the woods. Since the air was soft and the roads dry, I was halfway through the trail. When I heard it, "Alina," the sound came again. Low, hoarse, like someone trying to remember how to speak. I turned, and standing just past the treeing in the filtered light of the setting sun was a man, thin, disheveled. His hair longer than I remembered, his face drawn, his clothes filthy. But it was him, Caleb. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. My body forgot how. All I could do was stare as every cell in me screamed, "He's real. He's here." He came back. But then came the second thought, the quieter one. Why, now, and why does he look at me like I'm a stranger? I didn't run to him. I couldn't. My legs were rooted to the forest floor, like the moss-covered trees around us. I must have looked mad. Grocery bags dangling from my arms, mouth half open, tears springing to my eyes before I even realized they were there. He took a slow step forward as if afraid I'd vanish if he moved too fast. His eyes searched my face as though trying to remember it. "Alina," he said again like it was the only word he remembered. The sound of my name in his voice, it shattered something. I dropped the bag, apples rolling into the underbrush, and staggered forward. I wasn't graceful. I didn't care. I closed the distance between us and threw myself into his arms. He didn't push me away, but he didn't quite hold me either. His arms hovered for a moment before settling awkwardly around my waist, like he'd forgotten how to hold someone who loved him. "Where have you been?" I gasped against his chest. "Do you know what you've done to us? Do you even know what day it is?" He didn't answer. He just whispered, "Let's go home, please." So I took him there. We walked in silence down the gravel path, past the hedgerows I had trimmed, the shed I had painted, the wooden gate I had repaired with Eleanor last summer. Everything felt surreal. I kept glancing at him, afraid he might disappear again, but he didn't. When we reached the porch, I pushed the screen door open and called out, "Eleanor, Mama, you need to come out, here." Eleanor had just finished folding laundry in the kitchen. She stepped into the hallway, wiping her hands on a towel, her thin white hair pulled back into a neat bun. She saw him and froze. The towel dropped to the floor. Her lips trembled. "Caleb." He nodded just once. She reached for the wall to steady herself. "I thought you were dead. I buried you in my mind 1,000 times. Don't you dare come in here unless you are real." "I'm real, Mama," he said, and this time, his voice cracked. She let out a strangled cry and rushed to him, frail arms wrapping around his neck. He buried his face in her shoulder like a child, and for the first time since he came back, I saw him cry. I stepped aside, let them have their moment. I watched from the doorway like an outsider in my own home. Later, after the tears and questions and disbelief had settled into stunned silence, we sat around the dinner table. Caleb picked at the soup I'd made. He hadn't asked for anything, just eaten slowly, mechanically, like food was unfamiliar. Eleanor watched him like a hawk, barely blinking. I couldn't stop glancing between them, wondering which one of us would dare ask the question first. I finally broke the silence. "Where were you, Caleb? What happened?" He looked at me then for real. His eyes locked onto mine, and something flickered there. Guilt, maybe, or regret. "I'll tell you everything," he said quietly, "but not tonight. I'm not ready." That should have been a red flag, but I was too exhausted to push, too desperate to believe this wasn't a dream. I cleaned up the table. I put Eleanor to bed. I laid out fresh towels for Caleb and set up the guest room, even though we both knew it used to be his. When I finally climbed into bed, my chest tight with 1,000 questions, I turned off the light and whispered to the dark. He came back. He really came back. But even as I said it, I could feel it. That quiet, gnawing thing inside me. Something wasn't right. It took him 2 days to tell me. 2 days of quiet glances, shallow conversations, and long silences between sips of coffee. Caleb spent most of his time sitting on the porch with a blanket over his shoulders, staring into the trees. Eleanor hovered around him like a ghost, afraid to touch him, afraid to let go. On the third evening, I handed him a mug of tea and sat across from him in the living room. The wood stove was crackling, casting flickers of orange against the walls. Outside, the valley was already cloaked in fog, and everything felt like it belonged to another world. "Talk to me," I said gently. "I need to know where you've been, even if it hurts, especially if it hurts." He didn't look at me right away, but then he nodded slowly, as if surrendering to something that had been chasing him for years. "It started at work," he said. "You remember the logistics firm? Things were falling apart, big shipments vanishing, clients pulling contracts. The owner thought someone was leaking routes or stealing inventory. I remembered, he'd come home, tense every night, rubbing his temples, muttering about mistakes that weren't his. Then one day, he continued, my boss told me to meet a delivery truck at a different location. Said it was safer. He gave me an address near the old industrial zone off Highway 22. I felt my stomach tighten. The one behind the chain link lots. He nodded. I should have known, but I didn't want to lose my job, so I went. It was late afternoon. Sunny, I remember that clearly because the sun was in my eyes when someone hit me from behind. I closed my eyes, breathing slow, my heart pounding like I was the one being attacked. When I woke up, Caleb whispered, I was in the back of a truck. My hands were tied. My head felt like it had been split open. They must have drugged me, too. Everything was hazy. I couldn't think straight. He paused, his fingers trembling around the mug. I reached over and held his hand, and this time he didn't pull away. They took me to a compound. I don't know where. Somewhere deep, remote. No cell signal, no traffic noise, no nothing. Just trees, fences, barbed wire. It was surrounded by greenhouse tunnels like a nursery, but not the kind people visit on Sundays. He exhaled hard, eyes unfocused. They told me I owed money, that I had to work it off. They didn't say how long. They didn't explain anything, just uniforms, orders, food rations, and rules. I wanted to interrupt, to ask who they were, why him, but I knew the answers wouldn't help, so I let him go on. There were others, men, women. Some had been there. For years, they called it the farm. We weren't allowed to talk much, but I met one girl, Sierra. That name hit me like ice down my spine. I tried not to react. I failed. She was young, barely 20, naive as hell, but smart. She wasn't like the others. She noticed things. She figured out the guard schedules, watched where they kept the phones. My throat was dry. She helped you escape. He shook his head. She helped us all escape, but not directly. One day, while distracting one of the guards, she snatched his phone and sent a single message to her father. Turns out he's a doctor, a powerful one with contacts. He raised hell with every agency you can think of. 3 days later, they raided the place. And I was in the greenhouse. I saw the vans pull up. The men in black stormed the buildings. I didn't move. I just watched. Then Sierra grabbed my hand and pulled me toward a car I didn't recognize. Her father was inside. I tried to keep my voice level. So that's where you've been with her? No, he said quickly. They offered me a place to stay while the investigation was ongoing. But I told them I wanted to come home to you and to Mom. I wanted to believe him. But there was something in his voice that didn't quite land. She risked everything, he added softly. If it weren't for her, I'd still be there. I stood up. I need to take care of the laundry. Wait, he said, rising too fast. Don't go, please. I didn't tell you all this to push you away. I stared at him. The man I had mourned. The man I had waited for. He was here, but pieces of him were still missing. And I wasn't sure if they would ever come back. Something changed after he told me, not in the way I expected. I thought I'd feel closer to him, relieved, like the truth would wash away the distance between us. But instead, it only made the silence louder. In the days that followed, Caleb stayed. He ate with us, helped with yard work, even sat beside me on the porch swing in the evenings. But there was a stillness to him, a kind of emptiness that made him feel absent, even when he was right in front of me. He didn't touch me the way he used to. He didn't kiss me goodnight. If I leaned my head on his shoulder, he'd stiffen like I'd caught him off guard. I told myself he was traumatized, that he needed time, that love could wait. But deep down, I already knew the man I'd waited for was not the same man who came back. It all fell apart the following weekend. I had just come home from the Linwood estate, still in my work shoes, when I saw them. 2 unfamiliar vehicles parked near the fence. Shiny, dark SUVs that didn't belong to anyone around here. I felt my stomach turn. Inside the house, laughter drifted from the dining room. Soft, easy, like it belonged to a family gathering. For a second, I thought Eleanor had company. Maybe Logan and Aunt Nancy had stopped by. But when I walked in, I froze. Sitting at our table was a girl, young, beautiful, blonde hair tied in a loose braid. Over one shoulder. She was holding Caleb's hand. Next to her sat a couple. Elegant, well-dressed, clearly wealthy. Her parents and Caleb. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at her. I didn't say a word. I just stood there in the doorway, watching it all unravel. Eleanor turned around and saw me. Alina, sweetheart, I thought you were working late. Her voice trembled just slightly. I smiled stiffly. Apparently not late enough. Caleb finally looked up. Come in. I want you to meet someone, he said. It like we were strangers, like I was a guest in my own life. This is Sierra, he continued. And these are her parents, Dr. Charles Collins and Mrs. Ellen Collins. They're the ones who helped rescue us. Sierra smiled at me with all the ease of a woman who knew she belonged. I nodded back, numb. I don't remember sitting down. I don't remember what I said. All I remember is watching her run her fingers gently along Caleb's arm. As she told the story of their escape, how he protected her, how he made her laugh. Even in hell, she wasn't being cruel, she was being honest. And that honesty cut deeper than any lie ever could. When the table fell into a moment of silence, I looked straight at Caleb. Do you want a divorce? The words didn't tremble. They just landed. He didn't flinch. He looked sad, maybe apologetic, but not surprised. I don't want to hurt you, he said. But I think it would be worse to keep pretending. I nodded slowly. Okay. Sierra looked down at her hands. Her parents exchanged a glance. Eleanor said nothing. And just like that, I knew the man I had loved, the man I had waited for, wasn't mine anymore. I stood up, smiled politely, and said, excuse me. I'll start preparing Mom's medical documents for the clinic since you'll all be going together. I turned away before anyone could see the tears, but they came anyway, not because he left, but because he never really came back. The days that followed were in quiet humiliation. Caleb didn't move out. Not right away. He stayed in the guest room. Sierra and her parents came and went, always polite, always smiling, always talking to Eleanor in those smooth, professional tones that wrapped cruelty in silk. They offered to move both Caleb and Eleanor into a private medical facility outside Eugene. Said they'd cover everything, testing, rehab, even a full physical for Caleb, just to be sure he hadn't developed anything in captivity. Eleanor looked overwhelmed but grateful. Caleb looked compliant, like someone being moved across a chessboard without much say. Me, I made copies of insurance papers. I scheduled appointments. I labeled her medication and packed her things in a neat rolling suitcase. I kept my voice even. I smiled. I didn't cry. Not in front of them. Sierra followed me into the kitchen one afternoon. She had taken off her shoes and was walking barefoot like she belonged. She leaned against the counter, holding a glass of water, watching me stack medical forms. "You're really organized," she said. I could never keep track of this stuff. I nodded. Someone had to. She hesitated, then added, "I hope you don't hate me." I looked up at her. Her face was so open, so young. "I don't hate you," I said, "but I'd like you to leave the kitchen now." She blinked, startled, then stepped back and left without a word. That night, I sat with Eleanor while she drank her tea. She looked older than I had ever seen her. Her hands shook. Her eyes were red. "Sweetheart," she said, "I'm sorry. I know this is wrong. I know what it looks like. But Caleb, he's my son, and I can't throw him out." I nodded. "You don't have to explain. I get it." "No," she said firmly, grabbing my hand. "You don't, because if I were braver, I'd tell them all to leave. I'd tell Caleb to wake up. But I'm tired. And I think part of me is just relieved he's alive." Her voice cracked. "I didn't think I'd ever see him again." "I know," I whispered. She looked at me with so much guilt I had to look away. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," she said. "But if you need time, if you need to stay a while longer, this house is still yours." I smiled at her, soft and tired. "I'll stay until I find something. I won't leave you alone." "You're not alone either," she said. "At least I hope not." The next morning, I packed a small bag and drove to my old apartment on the edge of town, the one Caleb and I had lived in during our first year of marriage. It had been rented out since then, but the tenants had just moved out. My Aunt Nancy had been managing it for me while I was away. I walked into the empty space with its cracked linoleum and faded curtains and felt my knees buckle. I wasn't his wife anymore. I wasn't even part of his future, but I was still standing. And somehow that had to count for something. The apartment smelled like dust and leftover paint, but it was mine. Nancy and Logan showed up to ours after I called. She brought bags of linens, and Logan came with a van full of second-hand furniture. Within the hour, my kitchen had a table again. My bed had clean sheets. There were even tiny potted herbs on the windowsill, basil, rosemary, and mint. I hadn't asked for any of it, but they came anyway. That night, we ate takeout on the floor and drank wine from mismatched mugs. It wasn't a celebration, but it wasn't mourning either. "You going to be okay here?" Logan asked, glancing around the place like he was mentally measuring all the ways it could be better. I nodded. "It's not perfect, but I need the space." Nancy smiled knowingly. "Sometimes healing starts with square footage." Someone knocked on the door around 8. Logan went to answer it, and I heard his voice shift. Friendly but curious. "Daniel," he called out. "Alina, you remember my friend Daniel?" Right, I did. Barely. Daniel had been in high school with Logan. He worked in town as a carpenter now, drove an old blue truck with sun-faded seats and a dog that never left his passenger side. He stepped in with a small tool bag in one hand and a Tupperware dish in the other. "I figured you'd need curtain rods and probably haven't had a decent meal in a week." I blinked at him. "How did you?" He smiled gently. "Everyone talks, but I don't listen unless it's someone I care about." Nancy raised her eyebrows at me in that subtle matchmaking way only a southern aunt could pull off. I ignored her. Daniel didn't stay long. He helped hang a curtain, fixed a drawer, and gave me a smile that wasn't expectant. It was simply kind. After he left, Logan leaned in. "He likes you." I shook my head. "Don't start." "No pressure," Nancy said, sipping her wine. "But it wouldn't kill you to let someone be nice to you, for once." I didn't answer. I wasn't ready. But that night, as I lay in my old bed in a new version of my life, I realized something. I hadn't thought about Caleb once in the past hour, and that felt like progress. The next morning, I called Ms. Linwood to let her know I wouldn't be returning full-time. She was disappointed, but understanding. You always were too bright for the back hall, she said. You ever need extra sewing work, you call me. I trust your hands more than any boutique downtown. I thanked her and hung up, then sat in silence for a moment, the phone still in my hand. I wasn't sure what I was yet, ex-wife, caretaker, tailor, nobody, but I was something, and I was moving. That afternoon, Daniel dropped off a stack of flyers for a night course at the community college. Nursing assistant training, practical, short-term, affordable. He didn't say a word, just left it on my stoop with a sticky note that read, "You've already been doing this. Might as well get paid for it." I laughed for the first time in what felt like years. I laughed out loud. Maybe the road back to myself wasn't paved with grand reinventions. Maybe it was lined with curtain rods, Tupperware, and sticky notes. The first weeks in the city passed like water through cupped hands, messy, fast, and impossible to hold on to. I took on small sewing projects from Ms. Linwood's connections. Hemming expensive skirts, fixing vintage blouses, repairing antique linens that smelled like mothballs and old perfume. I worked at the kitchen table with the radio humming in the background and the breeze from my tiny window bringing in the scent of rain-soaked pavement. It was quiet, lonely sometimes, but not painful. I signed up for the nursing course, 3 nights a week, for hours each. It felt strange being in a classroom again, surrounded by women younger than me and older than me, and some just like me. People who had lived too much, lost too much, and still showed up. We practiced injections on dummy arms. We learned to measure vitals, turn patients safely, clean wounds, and I realized something. I'd already done most of it. I had done it for Eleanor for years, quietly, invisibly, without a paycheck or applause. Now, I would do it with purpose, with pride. Eleanor called sometimes. She said Caleb was doing well. The clinic was lovely. Sierra came by often bringing books and vitamins and soft music on her phone. I said I was happy for them, and maybe I was a little. Sometimes I'd hang up the phone and feel nothing. Other times I'd cry for 10 minutes straight and not know why. But then I'd make tea, go back to my sewing machine, and finish whatever work was in front of me. I wasn't whole, but I wasn't broken either, just rearranged. Daniel stopped by more often. Never too much, just enough. He helped fix a leaky pipe. Dropped off soup when I caught a cold. Lent me a pair of gloves when I mentioned mine were too worn. He never asked for anything. Never pushed. He just showed up. One Saturday, I found a folded paper on my doorstep. It was a sketch. Pencil on lined notebook paper of a tiny front porch wrapped in string lights with a sewing machine visible through the window and a cat sleeping on a cushion underneath. He'd written just a thought. I smiled so wide my cheeks hurt. I didn't call him right away, but I pinned the sketch to my fridge. And that night, I whispered to myself, "You're doing okay, Alina." And I was for the first time in 5 years. I wasn't waking up for someone else. I wasn't living in the space between hope and grief. I was just living. Not all days were beautiful, but none of them belonged to him anymore. They were mine. I saw him again on a Tuesday. I had just finished a practical exam at the clinic. My backpack was heavy with textbooks and my hand smelled like antiseptic. As I stepped into the lobby, adjusting my coat, I froze. There he was, Caleb. He was standing beside the check-in desk, filling out a form. His profile was sharper than I remembered, his beard trimmed, posture straighter. And beside him, Sierra, her belly was round beneath a soft gray sweater, one hand resting protectively on it. They looked like a picture in a waiting room brochure. Whole intact, expecting, for one terrifying second, I wanted to disappear. But then Sierra turned and spotted me. Her face lit up with surprise, then hesitation. She nudged Caleb gently. He looked up and our eyes met. It was silent, just for a moment. Then I smiled, not out of pain, not from habit, but because I meant it. He opened his mouth as if to say something, but I gave a small nod and walked past without stopping. Not cold, just done. Outside, the wind was sharp and full of late autumn leaves. I wrapped my scarf tighter and kept walking. The world didn't slow down. It never does. But then, at the end of the block, I saw him, Daniel, leaning against his truck with 2 coffees in hand and that familiar half-smile on his face. "You looked like you could use something warm," he said, holding one out to me. I took it, curling my fingers around the paper cup. "You always know." He shrugged. "I listen." We didn't say anything else for a while, just stood there together, letting the moment breathe. I didn't feel like I was standing in someone else's shadow anymore. I didn't feel like leftovers from someone else's story. I felt here, present. I turned to him, my voice low. You ever think about second chances? He glanced sideways all the time, even for people who never thought they'd deserve one. His answer was immediate, especially for them. We got in the truck and drove, nowhere fancy. Just out toward the edge of town where the trees turned gold and the air smelled like pine. As the sun sank behind the hills, I rested my head against the window and closed my eyes. I didn't know where life would take me next, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for Caleb, not for closure, not for anyone to give me permission. I had already survived the worst parts. And now I was free to begin again. Not as somebody's wife, not as the woman who waited, just as me. And finally, that was enough.